Right, welcome everyone that's joined us online for the first time in 5 months. I've just checked up for a Draw Your Sword call with Brian Schaefer. So lots happened in the last 5 months, but little has happened at the same time, which I'm sure Brian might touch on throughout the call. But tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're going to spend the first hour with Brian giving us a bit of an update of where things are at in his world, planetary type update, and so on and so forth. And then around after an hour, we'll stop recording this particular talk, and Brian will do about an hour introducing his exciting new book that's just been released, Inward Bound. So stick around with us. The first part of this is a bit of a general update, and then we'll get stuck specifically into the book around about an hour's time. So Brian, it's good to see you over video, even after spending a month up there in your neck of the woods recently. And thanks everyone else for being here too. And as usual, just pop your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to them as we go.
Hi everybody, it's good to be back. I'd like to be back under better circumstances, but hopefully we can remedy all that tonight, not just within ourselves, but on a planetary and universal level. As you all well know by now, there's nothing really changing out there other than the agenda that I've been speaking about for the last 37 years bearing down on us. And despite everyone's best efforts, again, not being dismissive or critical of anything, but it's simply just not working. And this is where we have to literally draw our swords on all our existing concepts and beliefs and things like that, and really examine something that's completely outside of the square. So if we can continue doing all the petitioning and not consenting and all that sort of stuff till the cows come home, but like it's very, very obvious that it's like again what Buckminster Fuller said, we have to create a new paradigm. So there's no point whatsoever talking about the old one. It doesn't matter what Bill Gates and his mates are doing. It matters what you think and how you think according to the 18 origins of your thoughts, and being guided towards the ultimate and the inevitable outcome. Right? Nothing, I can guarantee you, nothing's going to change in the external world until you have that internal transformation where you consciously align and connect to your intuitive process, and then find that timeline. You know, there's a lot of people out there thinking I'm a new age philosophical bullshit artist talking about timelines, but it's actually the nature of our consciousness. And, you know, I draw my sword on anybody who's actually not ready, willing, and able to stop and think about something other than what they already know. But this is something I like to emphasize in my events. You know, like I say to people, tell me something you know a lot about, and tell me something that you're perhaps an expert in. And they have no trouble whatsoever coming up with something they do know and understand, and they know a lot of. But then I ask them, tell me something you don't know anything about. And they say, well, I don't know anything about, say, rocket science. Well, what don't you know about rocket science? Well, I don't know about rocket propulsion. I don't know this. So you already know things that you don't know, but what do you know nothing about? And we're not designed neurologically to look for what we don't know, right? Because like when we don't have those natural pathways of intelligence, we don't realize we're missing the point. And like a lot of what I share is explaining to people how and why we're missing the point. And the basis of that is that we simply don't have the pathways. And this is where, you know, all the old sayings is, you know, you can't change something on the same level that it's created it. So this is why we have to literally pull our heads in and find a new path altogether. And those of you that know that, you know, I've shared the alien interview in the past, like in 1947, there was that Roswell incident, and supposedly one of the aliens survived the crash and talked telepathically to one of the nurses. And what they related, whether it's true or not doesn't really matter, because everybody I've shared it with says it's the best interpretation of history that they've ever heard of, you know. So it's still enough to shift people's perspective of what the nature of our reality is. But, you know, we can explore the nature of reality. We can see all the good versus evil, but we're not tapping into the nature of consciousness itself. And this is where everybody's missing the point. You know, the nature of reality is still dualistic, but you have to actually find the conscious paradigm, and in that start to explore the nature of consciousness. So in the alien interview, they explain how this is all just a play of consciousness, and it's all being done simply to break the boredom within being the absolute, all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present. So the divine reduces its consciousness into a limited form to basically solve a puzzle, like the jigsaw of life, to work its way back to itself. And so at the level of the game we're playing, and at the moment, there's parts of us that are playing the role of Bill Gates and his mates, playing the bad guy, the psychopathic, the villain. And the alien interview explains very clearly how we're not meant to resist anything, but people are still resisting it. They're talking about, how to, petition against vaccinations and all that sort of stuff. And it will never work. And that's the problem, that people can't see that will never work. It's just another factor within the dualistic paradigm, and it perpetuates it because it's a level of resistance and it keeps feeding into it. So the other thing that was in the alien interview, it said that the only thing that will work is a conscious collective effort where we establish a power unto ourselves. And that's, I mean, again, whether it's fiction or not doesn't matter. But the essence of the story and the essence of how to play the game is within it. And that's the beauty of it. So it's very simple. Just forget about the dualities. Just find that point within ourselves, stay anchored in it. And, like I treated a guy recently and he was completely insane. Like he completely bought into the whole fear of being vaccinated. His friends and family were going to get vaccinated. And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, the Illuminati's already won. They only made the threat, and you completely collapsed under the weight of that threat, and you're resisting it rather than going, that's their threat, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And if we all consciously did that, like again, the key word within conscious collective effort is conscious. If we consciously directed our energies towards first the beauty, goodness, and freedom, and once we're saturated in that, then we'll be connected to the flow, which is the grace, purity, and liberation, where we are consciously aware of our thoughts as we are guided towards the ultimate and the inevitable. It's so painfully obvious and simple, but there's so many people who, again, due to all the neurological things I've talked about in the past and the lack of pathways, they literally can't stop and think, right? Remember, all the compensatory pathways, they use momentum to perpetuate themselves. So they can't actually stop and think. And this is why I did a little experiment recently, and I just made a comment on a popular Facebook page, and I got slammed. I had everybody just, there was only, I wasn't totally slammed. I mean, half the people liked and loved what I posted, and all the people who weren't aware of Bill Gates and his mates and thought I was a conspiracy theorist, they just absolutely hammered me. And the reason why I did that, and a lot of people were thinking, like, why the hell would you bother? It's like, well, a few days before that, I had a bit of an insight into how and why people can't change paradigms. And it's not only where I'd get people to do the six with their finger in a circle with their foot. It's like it's beyond the neurological. Well, there's still a neurological factor, but it's beyond the personality that comes with somebody who's not open to correction. And that's usually on the narcissistic level, right? So this is where people like Richard Grannon and that are so accurate in what they're talking about, the epidemic of narcissism now. And like narcissism breeds narcissism. But what I realized when I had this insight is that it's beyond narcissism now. It's actually towards psychopathy and sociopathy. And that means for those of us who are awake, and at the moment there's only 10 people on the call, so we can see how many people are really wanting to be awake and awaken, right? So if this was 10 million, it would be a different story, right? But it actually reinforces the fact that we have to be realistic about how we individually play the game and exactly how we spend our time and energies. And at the moment, there's not a lot of people still after January. I think I wrote Draw Your Sword in the middle of January. And there's probably been at least 5,000 people that have seen it. And most of that was initially. Then, it's no surprise that the whole thing just fizzled out. because when those of you that know my book, and I don't know whether I've actually done any blogs on it. Mark, do you know if I've done any blogs where I talk about the 6 natures of personal reality, the true and false negative, true and false positive, true and false awareness?
Not off the top of my head.
Oh, I actually might have touched on that in the Nature of Life one or the 2 Paradigms one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a video where I might have touched on it, but
yeah.
What's actually happening is, due to all the neurological deficits, the personality that results from that, and the human condition where people are egocentric, ignorant, arrogant, psychopathic, antagonistic, and atheistic. They're the 6 traits of the human condition, which is the result of all the above, all the agendas, all the conditioning and programming. Then, so that's where people's personalities have gone from narcissism to psychopathy. And this is why when you look at it, it seems a bit odd how we are so open to being entertained, where the plot of the story is there's a good guy who's always fighting a bad guy, but the bad guy is always a psychopath. You know, whether it's the Joker in Batman or whatever movie, the villain is always a psychopath. Yeah. And this is where, because that's all been part of our conditioning. You know, the cowboys and Indians, you know, when I was a kid playing cowboys and Indians, I was always wanting to be the cowboy and be the savior and the hero. And, you know, whereas now I want to be the Indian. I want to be the one that goes back to living a pure, simple, natural life, and defend and protect that. Yeah. So this is where the personality disorders are becoming so extreme now. That's why I put that blog out. So why I put that little comment on that popular website, is to just see the actual slant to which they were coming at it from. And in my book, I don't know whether you can see it. It's on the chart behind me here. There's 6 elements of consciousness and the 6 elements of intellect. And when people are not connected to the nature of things, they actually focus on the intellect. And this is where they want to become academic, and everything has to be intellectually provable. They can't go by, I talk about this in the book, the 6 types of knowledge, right? So if you want to look that up, it's really worth looking into, the 6 types of knowledge. So then people can't speak from their own direct experience. It's all scientific and that sort of stuff. And like those of you that know me, I've researched, you know, this solidly for 37 years. And I had one person say to me, how can you research something for 37 years when Google's only been around for 16 years? You know, that's how psychopathic these people's reasonings are. And, you know, like, how do people only validate people who have got academic potential, like academic qualifications? And like maybe 20 years ago, one of the naturopaths I studied with at the naturopathy college, when he got to realize the depth and the extent of the research I'd done till then, he said, you know, those of you that know me now, my name, everybody who knows me calls me Kitchu. He said, Kitchu, you've got the equivalent of two PhDs under your belt. And that was like 20 years ago. But like, I don't really want people to know what I know, because there's no point them knowing what I know if they don't know even the basics, right? So I've had a lot of people staying with me lately from South Australia. Mark's been up for, well, you were up for a month, were you, Mark? Yeah. Mark and his family. Yeah. So, you know, we had a house full of, you know, really great people, and we've had some really good conversations. And now, you know, with all the other activities we've been involved with, everybody that was here is now up to speed with the total model that I was talking about. Yeah. So I can now explain everything, especially from having done the Hole-in-One workshop. And it's like I was explaining to somebody today, and I just went into my nutty professor state. I was actually had one of the guys on the table, and out of that conversation grew, I went into a whole explanation of things that went beyond what I explained in the every single thing within consciousness, every single thing within life, within our personalities, I can map and scale. And I basically explained that to the guys this morning. And later on I said, so it's all very obvious now that you can see it. So if what I'm saying is not true, then what is? And, you know, like it becomes like the analogies I talk about in the book. You know, once you can see it, you can't unsee it. And once I explained the entire model and the depth of it to everybody, they go, well, yeah, that's obvious now. And then this is where the conversation went where, you know, somebody else said, well, you know, most people aren't even able to stop and think about the first step to what you're saying. And I said, that's my point, right? So the magnitude of the momentum within people's compensations, and this is what I did the comment again, they weren't even able to stop and consider anything outside of what they already knew. So that basically was like a confirmation to me that we can only work with those of us that are already awake, right? Because if you look at the actual psychological state and the neurological condition of these people, they're so far gone in the human condition that you literally can't get through to them now, right? And I don't know where this conversation's going, so I'll just spontaneously say what I've been thinking about. As you know, I've studied the brain more extensively than anybody else I know. And one of the things with mainstream science is they talk about the triune brain. And within the triune brain, they talk about the reptilian brain, mammalian brain, and the cerebral cortex. And they say there's also an aquatic brain, which is the brain, you know, how it all works while it's in the amniotic fluid in utero. So they say once we're born, that basically drops away, you know, all those factors are no longer irrelevant. But this is where I was trying to explain to one of my colleagues in England about how there's not just 3 or 4 layers to the brain, there's actually 10. And this is where in the Hindu philosophy, they explain the 10 levels of consciousness, and it goes from the fish all the way to the amphibian, then the reptile, and then I can't remember the order, and then there's the lion and the human, and it ends up at the Buddha state, right? So there's 10 levels. I can't quite remember what it's called off the top of my head, but there's 10 levels. So what they're actually doing is they're limiting our understanding to the development of again, they're talking mainly about the cranial brain, and it's not just the cranial brain. There's 6 brains in the body: the cranial brain, the heart brain, the stomach brain, the large intestinal brain, the genital brain, and the skin brain. So each one of those brains have got 10 levels of development to them. So what's happening is they're reducing everybody down to like a reactive level, which is on the limbic system level, which is reptilian level of the brain. And then they're actually treating people at that level. Whereas what I realized is that it's not just a reptilian level of reactivity in people's brains, it's the amphibian level of the brain, right? And then when I talk about the neurological development and the tests I've developed, most people have stopped developing in utero, which is the aquatic level of the brain. So we're already born in a compensatory way. And so when we're actually trying to deal with things, and we're stuck at best at the amphibian level, then all the treatments, all the theories, all the philosophies about being reactive on the limbic system is pointless, right? There's all the parts of the brain, and not just the cranial brain, but all the actual levels of the brain and the cells associated with those levels of the brain throughout the body, right? So this is what I was trying to explain to a colleague in England about how it goes beyond the cranial brain, and they just normally say the left brain and the right brain and maybe the cerebellum and the brain, but there's 10 levels of development within the brain, and each level of the development comes a level of consciousness that's attainable, right? And what's happening is, with all the fear that's happening through all the propaganda and all that sort of stuff, all the threat of vaccines, people are dropping below the reptilian into the amphibian level, and reducing their functionality, like the level of compensations, to an amphibian level, which is where all the fear paralysis and all that sort of stuff kicks in, and they're paralyzed just by the threat alone. Yeah, and that's exactly where the Illuminati wants everybody to be. They make a threat and everyone falls over. It's actually quite tragic. You know, so when people descend into that level of the brain, they're no longer just reactive on a narcissistic level on the reptilian brain. They go into a sociopathic, psychopathic level in the amphibian brain, where they're just cold-blooded and they've got no heart whatsoever. They're just ruthless and brutal. Yeah, and they, like I talk about the narcissists, where they do the three-way cut. They cut people down, apart, and away. This level of reactivity is to actually just, like I call it, candle snuff people, just completely snuff them out. They don't even want to spend the time to even criticize or condemn them, right? One lady just said, "Oh, shut up," you know, on one of the comments, right? So that's just like a complete dismissal, right? There's not even room for a debate. So that's what I was talking about in terms of the willingness to consider, and debate, and to actually come to a different level of understanding. And those of you that have read the book, I talk about the 18 levels of knowledge, right? To come to a different level of understanding, not just a different level of knowledge, because you've got knowledge, understanding, wisdom, realization, mastery, and then awareness. But that's the general thing, but there's 18 levels. People aren't even willing to increase their level of knowledge, let alone come to a level of understanding. And this is why it's impossible to appeal to people. I've had so many people come to me crying, how do I get through to my loved ones about, you know, the whole conspiracy and the scamdemic? And I'm saying, don't bother. You know, and now I understand that there actually are too far gone. So while we're wasting time trying to get through to people who are literally locked into that level of compensation neurologically and psychologically, we're draining our time and energy. Like, there's still a window of opportunity where we can win this game, but it has to be a conscious collective effort, and we have to channel our energy towards what is inevitable and ultimate, rather than actually trying to help people who are still not wanting to go. You know, like, there's so many people who instantly just, like, not just the people who are reacting on social media, but a lot of people who are dealing with relationships. You know, like I said, maybe one of the other calls, I went into an auto shop and I said to this guy who served me something about the whole scamdemic, and he said, "Oh, don't talk to me about it." He was having problems with his partner, who believed in the whole thing, and he was completely awake, right? So this is an extreme level of stress, yeah, from a lot of people. And this is what I'm saying, just back off. Don't even try to talk to people who are not ready, willing, or able to wake up. Just focus on those who are. And this is where the conscious collective effort so far has still been on pointing the finger. You know, all the political commentators, all the all the people, activists and that sort of stuff, they're still trying to wake up. You know, the activists and all that sort of stuff, they're trying to wake up the people who don't yet know. And the thing is that the people who already do know, they're slipping into the same state, because now that they know, there's nowhere for them to go. There's no one leading the way. And, you know, as you can see, like, we've got 12 people on the call now, and no one's interested in what I've got to say, right? And this is what I was saying before. If what I'm sharing is not true, then what is? I'm open to that, right? And then everybody who's taken the time to research it and to see the practicalities of it, they've all agreed that it is really the only way out. But this is where I had one of the most popular activists in Australia complaining to me about how he cut ties with all the other activists and all the other, you know, hot shots out there, you know, waking people up. And he said they're all in it for themselves. They either want to pull chicks, they want to become famous, or they want to become rich. And they weren't authentic in their role. They were only just, you know, trying to secure themselves something out of it, rather than being authentic and genuinely doing it in service to humanity. And therefore, that's why I said to him, I've already known that. That's why I don't involve myself with any of these people, because they aren't authentic in it. And what they're doing is still resisting the dualistic paradigm, which, you know, anybody who knows my work will understand that will never work, right? So that's what's happening within the draw your sword things, is that I've realized now that, you know, I'm going to do a follow-up to that at some point as well. But at those of you that know, I've been a little bit snowed under with getting the Inward Bound book finished. But hopefully after tomorrow, I'll have a bit of spare time. I was hoping to have another, I think it was 4 blogs or something written before Christmas. So that might still be attainable, I'll see. But with the whole draw your sword thing, as far as I'm concerned, and everybody who knows and understands what I'm sharing, they still all agree that it is literally the only way forwards, right? And the only way out of the mess that we're in. But again, you have to appreciate and honor the fact that most people are still at a level of compensation, and they still aren't able to stop the habit of resisting. So that's the draw your sword thing. The Universal Declaration side of things, it's still there. It's all pending. But now, if you understand what I've just said in relation to that, people are doing the Universal Declaration of Independence with the intent of freeing themselves of the problem. They just want to sign the declaration and claim it without any follow through on it. And this is where, again, it's no one's fault that they aren't able to follow through on it, because we're not neurologically developed or integrated enough to be able to find our way beyond the problem. Like this is what I was just explaining to some of the guys in the clinic room, where I was doing my Manati Professor thing on the whiteboard. Is like a lot of people, when they get to the point where most of you are at, and most of the people you know are probably at, is they establish reference points of truth that counter all the false realities, all the compensatory associations. But just knowing the truth about what's not true, and you're working your way backwards out of life, and you find the truth about everything you've been told, it still doesn't give you the truths that come with living in the wilderness. You've just learnt the truths about what's opposite to the zoo, right? Knowing and understanding the truth about, okay, well, living in captivity gives you these compensatory associations, and not living in the zoo will give you these reference points of truth. But what would be the reference points of having a conscious collective effort, living as a community in the wilderness, right? People don't have those pathways. So because they don't have the pathways, there's no conviction, commitment, and devotion to doing what they know they need to do to follow through on it. So there's no application, practice, and cultivation of the new, right? And that's what's needed. Everybody just needs to forget about the old paradigm. You know, they're looking for familiar new. They're not looking for new, and that's the problem, right? So this is where the new is challenging. It's extremely challenging. It puts you on the leading edge of consciousness, expanding into the unknown and even the unknowable. And that's actually where the fun begins. But it's if you've got any residue of an ego or an identity, that becomes very threatening. Yeah. And people experience that when they do ayahuasca and that sort of stuff, is that you have to die. You have to die to the identity. You have to die to the person you thought you were, and expand your sense of self, individual self, into being at one with the all. And only then are you empowered. Yeah. So the Universal Declaration is an honoring of that. And it's also a declaration that you're going to be ready, willing, and able to apply, practice, and cultivate everything you need to move forward as a sovereign soul, and not just keep yourself outside of the system. It's like you want to get to this gate, the zoo, or the gate of the zoo, or outside the gate of the zoo, but you're not. That's actually a declaration that you're going to go into the wilderness, and you're going to do whatever it takes to bring that into your life and share it with everyone else. That's the true meaning of the declaration. Right? The independence is getting out of the zoo. The sovereignty is that you're able to be a self-empowered individual living in the wilderness, in solitude if necessary, if you're not able to find a community, and then be a light to others. Yeah. So there's a lot of people at all the different stages of transition. People are waking up to the fact that being comfortable in a cage in the zoo is not that great. And there's people who are outside of the zoo wondering where the tribe is, wondering where community's at. So this is where there's the whole spectrum of people who are up in the zoo, and those people who are already out in the wilderness, and maybe they're alone in their own reality, there's enough people for everybody to come together and honour the essence of the Universal Declaration, which is to empower everybody in their sovereignty. And this is what's not happening. Yeah. And, you know, I'm still, you know, on the leading edge of consciousness expanding into the unknown myself. So I don't know, I know the answers. The answer is go back to living a pure, simple, natural life in the here and now. But that's the answer. But the challenge within the puzzle, within the game, within the role, is to how do you get other people at all the other stages of the comet tail of humanity to get awaken and go through all the stages and all the transitions and transformations to get to the point where we can share that. And we're trying to do that under an immense threat, which is essentially threatening every level of our being and every level of our consciousness. But if we get those vaccinations, you know, we're not going to be anything more than an intelligent animal, right? And a controlled and manipulated one at that. So this is where, you know, in that sense, the Joyous Sword and the Declaration of Independence haven't gone anywhere, other than reinforced and strengthened the state of grace in those people who did embody it. Otherwise, it just remains theory and philosophy to people who are still wanting to make the exit from the zoo to the wilderness part of their story. They can't just drop that story and say, well, you know, like I affectionately call it the fuck it point. They haven't reached the fuck it point yet where they go, okay, I'm done with this. They haven't suffered enough or been inspired enough to make that change. So, how are we going there for time, Mark?
Yeah, it's 7:05, so I got 25 here. Did you want to touch on anything with the Uluru thing tomorrow night? Is it worthy of a comment or yeah?
So this is where those of you that know me, I just had a treatment from a friend, and what came up in that treatment is that, like I literally hadn't had a day off since the middle of June. So I was pretty well running on empty there for a bit, and maybe only just this week, but I've still been flat out getting the book sorted. I'll tell you more of the story about the book later. But what came up in the session that I just had is that because there's so few people who are neurologically developed or integrated or have had the insights from having read the material, they're not open to the inspiration. So they're still craving more and more knowledge, right? More and more information. So that I get completely talked out talking about information. So at the moment, I'm in information sharing mode. Those of you that know me, I know I've got two modes: information sharing mode and inspiration mode. Information mode, I go pretty fast because those people, I'm mainly talking to people who already know me and already know the material, so I go pretty fast, right? Then there's people who don't know me and they can just play back the videos or whatever at a slower speed and watch it as many times as they need to. Whereas when I go into inspiration mode, which I will be sharing in the book and maybe after getting through this part, in terms of the Uluru and the other experiences I had, I'll go into inspiration mode, right? So there's two modes. So I've been in information mode or up till now, so I'm going to go into the inspiration mode. So with the tour I did to South Australia, this is where when I go on tour, I don't really come up for air very often, and this trip was no exception. It was probably more of an exception than anything else, as I just didn't really have a chance to stop and have a break at all. The whole, I think it was 6 weeks or something. And one of the cats is at the door wanting to come in. So what happened is after we were at Mark's place at Aldinga Beach in South Australia, we went across towards the middle of South Australia to a place called Kimber. And then we stayed there with some friends, and then on the way through to their other place in Venus Bay, we went to a place called Mount Woodner. And those of you that don't know, Mount Woodner is the second biggest rock in Australia to Uluru. So the order in which as far as I know, there's Uluru, which is the biggest, then there's Mount Woodner, and then there's Girraween, which is in the south of Queensland near a place called Stanthorpe. So that's the first, second, and third. So we just crawled into Mount Woodner, and while I was there, I had well, those of you that know me, I had a shift in consciousness, and I started talking to the Nunkery again, and they started telling me some really significant facts about what was happening. And this was in answer to those of you that know, the people I live and work with. They've been researching everything that Stephen and Evan Strong have been talking about with the activation of Uluru on the 21st. And so I've sort of been, I was too busy to go into all that. So I was getting it all secondhand. And when we got to Mount Woodner, the Nunkery stepped in and said, you gotta pull up here and have a listen to what we've got to say. And they said that they wanted me to go and activate this, all part of the activation of these rocks. And, you know, I take all these sorts of things with a grain of salt. You know, I know I sound like I'm off my meds, but I also take a bit of convincing myself, because until they actually really hit me with some really interesting facts, then, you know, sort of like, yeah, well, whatever. And I was pretty blasé about it all. And, you know, I didn't really take it seriously. And then, so more and more happened after Mount Woodner. We went to another place called Venus Bay, and from there we did sort of day trips out, and everywhere we went to rocks. And each time I went to these rocks, and again, this is where I sound like I'm off my meds, is that everything has consciousness within it. And there's male and female rocks. And everywhere I went, I would just put my hands on the rocks. And I can't really go too much into it because I'm going to give too much of the stories about in the Inward Bound, but I talk about what I do in the book Inward Bound. So how I do it and everything like that. So how I connect with the rocks, communicate with the rocks, and then there's a transfer of information and energy between me and the rocks, and usually the universe. So when I went to, there's a place called Murphy's Marbles, I think that was what it was called, and then I went to another place called Mount Hall. And when I went to Mount Hall, I think when we were from Murphy's Marbles, you can actually see Mount Hall from there. So we went to Mount Hall, and when I was there, the Nunkery really kicked in. So I had to scramble to the top of a rock, and I lay down and I talked to them, I don't know, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. And they were pretty brutal with what they had to say in terms of what was expected of me and what I needed to do and why. And in those particular connections, I don't really retain any of what I say. It's only the people I was with, they actually repeated it back to me, and they video or audio record the connection. And so what they said was, I have to activate from then I'd already activated however many rocks. And they said, I think there was another 27 rocks after that. And this story developed, so bear with me. So then I thought, okay, that's interesting. And while I was lying on top of this rock, I'll have to share some photos on Facebook. I literally haven't had time to share any of these photos. They said, this is the 33rd meridian of the Earth. And I said that to the guys that were climbing to the top of the rock with me. And that didn't mean anything to me at the time. And then once we scrambled back down this rock, we brought it up on the Google Maps, and it was exactly on the 33rd, what do you call it? The latitude. So that sort of was what was convinced me that I needed to sort of perhaps listen to what they had to say. And so without going into it, I probably will do a blog on it and explain it all, but by the time of this, you know, I've got another 20 minutes to go, you'll probably get a gist of where this is going. So each rock I connected with, it was a very distinct transfer of information and energy. I transferred information into the rock, it transferred information into me, and the energy shifted. And I'll explain more about the energy later. So then we went to other places. There was a place called the Organ Pipes, which is in the Gawler Ranges in South Australia. Like I did 10,000 kilometers and 120 hours of driving in 6 weeks. So it was pretty full on. And so we went to these rocks, and each one of them sort of gave me a piece of the puzzle. And then we went to the Gawler Ranges on the way through to Uluru. And when I got to Uluru, my friend and I, we looked at it and we thought, well, we got there late one night. So the next morning we went there, and when I connected to the rock, it was actually dead flat. It's like, you try to get any voltage. If you hook up a little LED to, or put a torch in a battery, it was dead flat. When I connected to the rock, it was dead flat. And when I connected it, it stirred. And it was like, oh, some energy. So what happened is all my chakras and all the energy that I'd got from all the previous rocks just instantly transferred into Uluru. It was sort of like giving it a jump start. Yeah. So literally all the chakras in my body, they all faced the rock and just blasted into the rock. And I go into a different state of consciousness, and I can't often recall all the transfer and everything that's said in that. But anyway, I probably need to, I started getting my phone out and doing an audio of what happens shortly after. So I've got some of the communications audio recorded. And so that was Uluru. And it was like, it was actually it didn't disturb me, but it just disappointed me, the fact that the reason why it was flat is because everybody went there and with the idea of taking something away from it. They wanted to take away the experience or take away the energy or something like that. And it wasn't that it lost energy. It's like, if you look at it, this is not that I agree with Dr. Emoto's work, and those of you that know me understand why, but the masters that I spent time with, they said everything operates according to an honor system. The rock wasn't being honored. And so this is where, because it was left lifeless, because everybody that went there was so lifeless in the human condition that we've just talked about, and they were wanting there to seeking an spiritual experience of something that enlightening them for them. And because they were not bringing anything to the place, and all the indigenous weren't there to keep the energies flowing and being honored, it basically went flat. So so then that started to make sense about what the nunnery had been saying to me. And my head's just exploding now as I remember everything that I've been told, because I haven't thought about this much since. And so anyway, that was Uluru. And then we went out to Katajuta, which is what they used to be called the Olgas. And when I went there, it was pretty late in the day, so I didn't have a lot of time. So I went to one of the big rocks, and when I connected to that, it was like boom. And it was like, I think it was the feminine energy. And I think it was the feminine energy first. And there was a whole exchange of information. And then I went across the gorge to another rock and touched it, and boom, it was the male energy. And between the two of them, it was saying that this whole activation of Uluru is to restore the relationship between man and woman. And because everything is everyone, because we're all one, we're not just activating the rock to be part of, to be a beacon of light within the universe. That's all true. But the only way that Uluru is going to be activated is if men honor women and women honor men. And that's why the rock's gone flat, is because people go seeking an experience of Uluru to somehow get some sort of charge, because the males in their life, if they're feminine, aren't honoring them, and vice versa, right? So the whole thing is about honoring, activating the male and the female within each other and honoring each other. And by doing that, all the energy points within the earth will fire up and support us externally in our relationship with the environment. We have to restore the masculine and feminine relationship within ourselves. And then when that's restored by consciously connecting to all the elements of earth, all the elements of nature, and I've got 8 elements, not the 5. You've got wood, fire, earth, metal, water, ether, air, and Buddhi, right? So Buddhi is the divine intelligence. So they're holographic, and this is where I'm going to do another book about the holographic nature of the elements of nature. So when we're disconnected from nature, all the organs, all the flows of energy within our body go out of balance. All the masculine and the feminine goes out. Hence all the gender dysphoria and that sort of stuff, and all the, the homosexuality and that sort of stuff. It's all due to, all the chemicals and all the electromagnetics, everything I talk about in the dodeck angle, disturbing the masculine and feminine energies. And as soon as they start to implode, they suck in the energy of those around them, right, to make up for what they themselves are missing. So what happened was, the Nunkery were explaining to me how there's 108 Nunkery, and there's the song lines are actually like the energy lines, and they're all connected to 108 rocks around the world, which are like the chakras of the earth. And all the different Nunkery spirits are converging on Uluru on the 21st, and they're all coming from the different down the lines and activating the rocks along the way. So all the rocks, if you understand how within, they're talking about sending all the frequencies, bouncing it off the stratosphere and everything like that, or the ionosphere, whichever one it was. They're bouncing it through the sky. There's more information being communicated through the layers of the earth than what people realize. And I think I should be safe in saying this, that the military actually communicates through the layers of the earth, like using submarine energy, submarine frequencies. And there's places like Kabbalah, north of Toowoomba, and it's a deep underground base where they communicate everything's done through the earth. And I had inside information from people I used to know up there when I lived up that way. And so that's what they're actually doing. It doesn't look much from the top, but it's all built under the ground, and they communicate through the earth more than they do through the sky. So what's happening is that's all interfering with the energies of all the ley lines, the song lines, all that sort of stuff. But it's also interfering with the energies and frequencies of the water, of the artesian bores and that sort of stuff, the artesian wells. And I posted a video on MeWeave recently about how when you put water through strong magnets, it energizes it. So it's having the opposite effect on the water. And those of you that understand my material, the water is in relation to the how component of information, which is kidney and bladder, and it's to do with the silence, internal and external. And so that's why there's no internal or external silence, because the water energy is being disturbed, the energy is not being honored in order to be able to go back to its natural state. So because the earth is being violated, and when we went through places like Cooper Pedy and Mount Isa, and all the underground mining, it's completely messing up all the energy grids, all the energies of the earth, and disturbing the polarities of the rocks. There's a really good video. I'm going to have to find it and put it in the comments or something underneath this video. But there's a way of telling whether a rock is male and female, and I'll share that. So it's disturbing the polarities of the rocks, which is interfering within all the energy grids of the earth, which is stopping rocks from Uluru from being active. And then if you've had a mushroom experience or an ayahuasca experience, you can see the consciousness within seemingly inanimate forms, and the role that they play in the relationships they have with us, and how they facilitate in us living in harmony together and in harmony with nature. And that's all that's missing. So yes, it's all very good what Stephen and Evan Strong are talking about, and it's all true to the point where you have to take it, put it all into context, where it's all about activating and helping all the masculine and feminine energies purify to align and connect within themselves, and then have that energy transferring onto others. And then when the consciousness of the planet is restored back to the balance between masculine and feminine, the frequency of the earth will then be able to play its role within the cosmos. And that's what's missing, right? So it's not about energizing the earth or the rocks. It's about restoring the conscious human experience within the masculine and the feminine. So I think that pretty well sums up what I had to share with that. I mean, I could talk endlessly about it, but I'd have to go back through all my notes and everything as well. But that gives everybody a summary of where things are at. So there's another lot of another lot of rocks that I have to go and activate, because the other thing is the activation starts on the 21st of this. Well, it's already started, but the conscious activation of Uluru starts on the 21st. But this is going to be an ongoing thing. So if you imagine it's a bell curve, it's the start of that wave, right? So we've got a long way to go in the conscious activation, but the activation is only going to be in proportion to our ability to activate the masculine and feminine within ourselves, right? And the only way we can do that is purify ourselves, which is what I talk about in the Schaefer cycle video. And the more we do that, then all our energies align and connect within ourselves. We can align and connect with each other. And that starts the external activation of the planet, where we do all the internal part below the surface of the earth, all the rocks, that sort of facilitates in the external activation of our energies. Okay. So that's pretty well everything I had to share in summary of all that. Hopefully you found that interesting and you don't think I'm completely nuts. But
is there anything, Brian, that you suggest? That obviously, you know, there's a bit of a global thing going on at 9:02 p.m. and that sort of thing. So for those of us that are a little bit, you know, deeper down the rabbit hole and so forth, is there something that that you feel we could get involved with tomorrow night at that time? Or
well, everybody who knows me and has done the Adada meditation, everything I share starts and stops with what I call the Supreme Divine Meditation. I haven't actually shared that online. There was in the 2 Adada videos, but they're still private because I'm still writing the book. But the other thing is if the highest truth, if you can, essentially the Supreme Divine Meditation is where your consciousness goes back to source. You become the source. You become everything and everyone in creation. From that point, everything is you in another form. And then you connect with all that, and you bring that awareness back to a single point of awareness. You take it through your supernatural body in Nirvana, and then bring that energy into your human form. And then from the human form, you radiate the same divine love, light and life to all beings in all worlds and all universes. So the human form is the center of creation, the center of the universe. And from the pure essence within your being, you radiate that divine love to all forms and all beings in all worlds and all universes, the same as you did when you went back to source. So that's the Supreme Divine Meditation. That's where everything I share starts and stops, really, because that's where we all ultimately end up, going back to pure oneness. So the other thing is the step back from that is what I call the Shaktiput meditation. And if you know one or both of those, then that's what you can engage in at this auspicious time. Yeah. So does anyone else have any questions or
yeah, we've got about, just thinking we've got about 3 minutes there until we sort of stop this one and then start the other one. But if anyone wants to ask a quick question, more than welcome to. If not, maybe we can have a little bit of a Q&A after Inward Bound as well, if you're still up for it.
Yeah. So does anyone have anything they want to ask in regards to that? I mean, it's a little bit left of center and it's a bit of a new interpretation of things, so it might take a little bit for people to get their head and hearts around, but I've sort of been sitting with this for, when was that? When did I leave your place, Mark?
November, was it? Yeah, November something?
Maybe middle of November. Was it 4 or 5? Oh, no, it would have been early November, maybe. Anyway, so maybe 5 weeks or something. So I've had a bit of a chance to get my head and heart around it. I haven't sort of consolidated on it all the details. I've simply been too busy. But yeah, so I think if everybody can take on board the purpose of the activation being in honor of the masculine and feminine within themselves and within all others, the true masculine and feminine, not the compensated form of it in terms of all the homosexuality and that sort of stuff, the pure gender part of it, then yeah, I think that's a pretty good takeaway. So anything else?
No, there was one question earlier on about Michelle. You answered it through what you were talking about. So
yeah. So just keep in mind that the whole activation is still the beginning of the start of the beginning, That's also the beginning of the end. So it's like if it's a bell curve, we're about halfway. So we're transitioning out of the old paradigm and starting the new paradigm. And those that are on that timeline, they can intensify the experience by focusing all their energy like a magnet to their leading edge. And then that energy then, like sort of in a torus, goes back to the comet tail and it keeps nature, nurture, nourishing themselves as a soul to the leading edge, so they can be a conscious soul and then play a role in the spiritual awakening of the planet, like the mass awakening. But it has to be an internal, like this is where, I can't say too much because I don't want to give some things away here, but this is where it becomes the individual in relation to the whole, because like when you do the Supreme Divine Meditation, that's the ultimate state, right? To stay in that state where every thought, word, and deed is literally radiating, emanating, and resounding love, light, and life. And so that's what we need to better find our way back to and stay anchored in it. And then that's the healing, is getting back to that state. Growth is expanding our experience and expression of it, and transformation is being able to share that with others as well. Yeah. So our external world becomes a reflection of our internal world. So.
Beautiful. If anyone happens to be on this call and has no idea what we're talking about in terms of what's happening at Uluru tomorrow, there's 9:02 p.m. there's a gathering of Indigenous elders that are coming together. It happens to be the solstice, obviously, tomorrow as well. But coming together, there's a particular prophecy that's been bandied about, and two people, Stephen and Evan Strong, have been researching and sharing a bunch of material. So if you want to read up on it and you're not aware of it before tomorrow, I'd suggest just chuck that into a Google search and you'll come up pretty quickly with it. But those that know Brian's material, that might be a nice way to spend a Monday evening connecting with, you know, some other people that are at least part way on the path in the collective consciousness.
Yeah, so it's also, another time if you find doing the lists beneficial, even just reading through them or just honoring them, having the list there just to honor everybody on the conscious list, because it is all about the honor system. Everything needs to be honored, and which is essentially the essence of what the Ho'oponopono is, the universal Ho'oponopono. So another way of facilitating the activation of what they're talking about is just to go into that universal Ho'oponopono state. Do all the bottom-up stuff on yourself first, and then be in a state where you do the top-down during that time, yeah? And do it on the planet, do it on the earth, do it on whatever elements of nature or humanity, yeah? Or you can do it on the universe as well, yeah?
Beautiful. Kathy's just asked, Brian, how do we learn to do these meditations? Do you want to answer that quickly, Brian?
Yeah, I did a blog on the Sharktiput meditation. What did I call it? You have to be realistic, expect miracles. There's a blog that I talk about, the main one. And the other one it's on a private video we might be able to share with you. I'm not sure whether it's the first or second one.
Perhaps if you drop Brian an email, he can send you those links.
I'm just sort of containing all that material until I've compiled it all into the next book, which is the Adata meditation book. And I'm hoping to have that done by the end of January. So I've got all energies focused on that now.
Beautiful. And obviously workshops when they're available. So
yes, that's right.
I'm Dylan. No, what?
All right. So any other questions before we wrap it up?
None in the chat box. So.
All righty. All right, well, hopefully this resonated with you. If not, well, then there's plenty of other things that will. And, look forward to seeing you maybe next time when there's something more to update. I probably will do an update probably early in the new year, because I only just touched on a lot of things that I can't really go into detail with. But, yeah, that's all for now.
Thanks again, Brian. And everyone, I'm just going to hit the stop on the record.